The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to those of you who have joined us already. We will get started here at 9 o'clock. We do have you muted, so if you are needing to ask a question, please use the question box, and I will be monitoring that so that we can then respond to any questions that you have. This webinar also will be recorded so that for those of our friends who could not join us today, or if there are things that you want to go back and review, we will have it recorded and posted on Oregon PGS for folks to be able to review that. So it is now 9 o'clock, and so want to welcome everybody for joining our webinar today. This is Roxanne Jones with Oregon Health Authority, and we have Jay Otto with us from Montana State University, who will be presenting for us today the webinar on key findings from our Oregon Problem Gambling Survey for our Reflect, Resource, Renew campaign. So thank you, Jay, and go ahead and take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. This is a great chance for us just to go over some of the key highlights from the survey. Katie was not able to join us today. She's on personal leave, so that's fine. So it'll just be me going through the results. So just to get our heads thinking about things, I just thought it was good if we started with some general prevalence information. This is from the 2016 OPGR survey, and helps us just understand from this survey, it was almost about 6 out of 10 folks reporting gambling behaviors in the past 12 months. This is in Oregon, and about 2.6% reporting either moderate or severe problem gambling behaviors. And you can see the moderate is about 2%, and the severe is about 0.5%. And I think it's important just for us to sort of set the stage a little bit. This gives us a sense that just over half of the folks are engaging in some forms of gambling behaviors on at least one or more times in a typical year, the past 12 months. So that behavior is somewhat common, although there's certainly a number of folks who don't engage. And then when we start looking at the prevalence of problem gambling behaviors, we're definitely seeing this as a rarer event, something that's not as frequent. And so when we're thinking about it from a survey standpoint, and sort of if I had 100 people in a room, it's only about 3 of those folks who might be on average who are experiencing problem gambling behaviors. So when we think about surveying like that, we know that we're going to be talking to a lot of folks who don't have problem gambling, aren't exhibiting problem gambling behaviors. So we really wanted to design and think about a survey that was accessible to everyone. There's about 4 out of 10 folks who don't engage in any gambling at all. So we just have that range to think about. It's also important as Katie has talked about, and I've talked about in some of the sessions, even though 2.6% seems very small, from a cultural standpoint, it is kind of small. The vast majority, about 97% of the population, is not experiencing problem gambling behaviors. But for those 2.6%, these consequences are very severe. It's causing a lot of harm to themselves, to their families, to others, may result in loss of employment, all sorts of very significant negative consequences. And though 2.6% seems small, that's still a lot of people. So, we're talking about tens of thousands of people in a state like Oregon. So this is definitely, we just have to start to go back and forth between thinking about numbers as percentages, but also thinking about numbers as numbers and the number of people who are experienced. So it's a significant number of folks who are, and a significant public health concern when we start thinking about the consequences for them and their family, even though 2.6 seems small. Okay, so when we engaged in our survey, our purpose of the survey was to really learn about the existing culture. And by culture, we mean the shared beliefs. And we're looking at a variety of beliefs. We're looking at values as a form of beliefs. We're looking at attitudes as a form of beliefs, as well as perceived norms and perceived control. So we're going to walk through those different kinds of beliefs, but there are a variety of beliefs we're going to look at. And we're really trying to understand sort of what are those shared beliefs around this idea of problem gambling, and specifically of folks, adults in Oregon. We did not look at youth, so this is just people age 18 and older, and so that's important to recognize. And the next step, we wanted to get a sense of what the existing culture is, but that was very much with the purpose of informing media and tool development. So as we created tools for you all to go out and help reduce the risky behaviors associated with gambling, as well as grow protective behaviors, as well as help folks who are engaging in problematic or formal problem gambling behaviors, helping them get help. So all of it was to help us better understand that so that we could create media and tools to bring to you all that you could then bring out to your communities. The approach that we used to do the survey was an online survey. This is happening more and more. It tends to be cost effective and pretty fast. We did 3 pilot tests of different forms of the survey. During those pilot tests, we often start with a large number of questions, and then we do various analyses of those results that help us narrow down to get at really the questions that give us the most information. The final survey was completed over the internet in May of 2018, and it had about just over 1,200 respondents. About half of those respondents were female. You can see the racial and ethnic breakdown of those folks, so they were somewhat similar to the general population of Oregon. About 9% were Hispanic. The ages were pretty similar to the U.S. Census. So we had a good cross-section of ages. We had young folks, 18 to 24, as well as older folks, people over the age of 75. So we were able to get a good mix there. We had a mix in terms of how they described their geographic location in terms of urban, suburban, and rural. Overall, though, their education, the folks who were taking the survey, was a little bit higher than the general population. And that's a typical pattern we often see with surveys, that in general, folks who take surveys tend to have a little bit more education than on average. Based on these responses, we did not do any weighting. We prefer to sort of look at things without weights. We'll look at some of the factors to see, does education attainment impact something? And for the most part, we didn't find a lot of relationships between the key beliefs we were looking at and any core demographic variables. So that also sort of led us not to do any kind of weighting. So from the folks who participated in this survey, we had about 65% of them report gambling in the past 12 months. That's a little bit higher than what we saw on that 2016 survey. And about 38% of those reported gambling monthly or more often. And you can see the list there as to how we gave them that list so that they had a very broad understanding of what we meant by gambling. So it really included a wide variety of potential gambling activities. So that gave us a good sense. I mean, it was somewhat similar to what we were seeing with the 2016 report, but we certainly had, a good portion of the people who were participating have engaged in gambling, but it certainly wasn't everybody. Now, we also wanted to check in with them to sort of see if they knew somebody who had experienced any problems associated with gambling. And so this gives us a sense are people in relationship or connecting to anybody who they might be worried about. And so you can see about half of them indicated that they know somebody who has spent too much money gambling. Slightly more than a third, somebody who's lied or avoided telling the truth because of gambling. About a third know somebody who's had relationship problems because of gambling. About a third who's not been able to pay bills. And smaller numbers in terms of somebody who lost a job or did poorly in school. So, a couple of things we take away from this. One is, as you all well know, for those folks who start engaging in problem gambling behaviors, it can have some real negative consequences that can influence them and others. But this was also important for us that about half of the survey respondents knew somebody who had, for example, spent too much money. So these are folks who are definitely starting to be aware of some of the negative consequences, and they're bumping into it. And that's important for, I think, all of us to understand as this project, because it does give us this sense that folks are coming across this issue. And so that's an opportunity. If we saw these numbers were extremely low, then it's harder to sort of reach the folks who might need help. But what we're seeing here is we've got a lot of folks who are potentially in relationship or know some of the folks who might be having issues, and that's a tremendous opportunity, because now they can help to be our allies to help maybe address some of those risky behaviors and things like that. So this was very encouraging. We also just wanted to see what folks' general concern was. And about half are moderately or more concerned about problem gambling in Oregon. Now, that brings it up that about half are less than moderately concerned. And so we've got some work to do there. We need to do some basic education and bolster folks' understanding of the negative consequences from problem gambling and help them recognize those. But we've got a good core who are concerned, so that's good. And as we might expect, fewer are concerned about problem gambling among their family members or close friends, because, as we looked at the beginning, it is somewhat of a rare behavior. So we wouldn't expect that to be too high, because we wouldn't expect, there aren't a huge number of folks who are engaging in problem gambling behaviors. So nonetheless, a quarter of the people having concern about a family member or close friend is, again, a huge opportunity. So with a quarter of the general population saying, yeah, I've got concern now about somebody, that's a great opportunity where we can help them engage on that concern. Now, about 1 in 5 were concerned about their own gambling behaviors. And so that's important too. And you can start to see some of the things that they did to address their concern. About 8 out of 10 began to limit their access to money. So that's an important sort of protective or planning behavior to help them monitor or reduce their gambling. About 7 out of 10 spoke to somebody else about it. Now, we don't know who they spoke to, and we don't know what that person said to them. But that's good that they were willing to talk to somebody else, and it also bolsters the sense that if they're talking to somebody else, does that other person know what to say or to help them move towards a healthier way of living and interacting with gambling? So that's an important opportunity. About 6 out of 10 looked at the internet for information. Of course, we all look at the internet for information. And we're getting into about half visited OPGR website, which is good. And those folks began to make some connection, which was good. They either chatted online, they may have texted or called. And about half perhaps were accessing counseling or treatment. So again, this is not half of the general population. This is half of the 20% of people who are concerned about their own gambling behaviors. So that's good that we've got some folks who are engaging in next steps. We clearly have a lot of room to grow those. And, but that was good to see that we had a place to begin and that folks were taking some protective measures. Now, we also asked them about their concern about somebody else's gambling behaviors. And here we see it's almost twice what we saw before. Before it was 20% were concerned about their own. Now we're almost at about 40% or twice, we're at 38%. We're concerned about somebody else's gambling behaviors. And we looked at what did they do about that. Well, about 3/4 spoke to somebody else about their concern. Again, we don't know who they talked to. We don't know what that person said to them. We don't know what was discussed, but at least they were taking some action, which is good. About 3/4 spoke to the person they were concerned about, so that's good. Again, we don't know what they said or if the person took action. About half looked at the internet, and similar percentages, well, we have some, about 4 out of 10 was taking steps to limit the person's access to money or help the person access counseling or treatment. And then we had some folks who were visiting the website here, but you can see that that's lower than what we saw on the previous. So they aren't necessarily engaging intensely with the website as a bystander. They were doing it for themselves a little bit more, but we can also help them realize that if you're worried about somebody else's behavior, you could also go to OPGR website to get some guidance on what to do as a bystander, as a friend, or as a family member. So this was good. This also gives us some valuable baseline data. If this survey was ever to be replicated in the future, we could start to see if these kinds of behaviors grow, so that as folks both are acting on their own self-interest or on the best interest of somebody else, these are all protective behaviors we might want them to do. So this was valuable in terms of that baseline. Now, what we did is we had the respondents read 5 different scenarios. These were 5 scenarios we had written. We actually worked with Roxanne to contact some of the OPGR counselors and to get some sort of, we began drafting some rough scenarios. We then ran them by the counselors. They gave us some feedback on those scenarios to make them even more realistic. And in those 5 scenarios, we had 3 scenarios described problem gambling behaviors. So if somebody was to use the DSM diagnosis, they would describe, based on the information in those scenarios, 3 of those scenarios as exhibiting problem gambling behaviors. And 2 of the scenarios did not exhibit problem gambling behaviors. So then we had people read those and ask them how concerned they were about the person's behavior. We also, I didn't report it here, but we had them how concerned they'd be if that person was a family member or friend. Just as sometimes we become more concerned when somebody is socially close to us than if they're socially distant. And then we also asked them, how much did they agree or disagree with the idea that something should be done to address this person's behavior? So we're sort of looking at that. Do they have what we would look at as a perceived injunction or injunctive norm to do something? Like, was it concerning enough that you think something should be done? And it was encouraging. Overwhelmingly, most people 94% were moderately or more concerned about the 3 scenarios that describe problem gambling behaviors. And many of the folks agreed that something should be done. So these, as I said, I think this is encouraging. People are able to discern when certain behaviors are risky. Now, they were moderately or more concerned. We can grow that level of concern. What we'd like to move that up to is to the extremely concerned level. So I think there's some opportunity to do some education there. We're obviously want to address the folks who didn't see concern in those scenarios. And then we want to bolster their sense of that something should be done as well. Then what we wanted to look at is, okay, if you were concerned about, let's say, the gambling behaviors of a family member or close friend, how willing would you be to take some action? And we wanted to look at a variety of different ways that they could engage with OPGR resources. I mean, one sort of a minimal risk, pretty passive, but still a start, is just to visit the website. And you could see 8 out of 10 were moderately or more willing to do that. Now, would you chat online with somebody? That goes down a little bit. And then would you text? That goes down even further. And then with similar levels in terms of being able to call and ask for guidance. So these are encouraging. but there's clearly room to grow. We want folks to be very willing and comfortable to get help if they're worried about somebody. So, you know, the basic theory is here we want people to be able to recognize concern, recognize a potentially dangerous situation in terms of somebody engaging in problem gambling behaviors, and then we want them to feel empowered to take action. We also know that if we sort of look at this through the lens of them taking action on behalf of somebody else, they're also likely to take that same action for themselves. So while we ask questions about would you engage on somebody else, that also is an indicator of how much they might engage for themselves as well, and especially if they know what to do. So the survey, we couldn't get this, we didn't want to do parallel questions about would you do all these things for yourself, and then another set of questions, would you do all these things for a family member or close friend, because the survey just gets too long. So we actually did it for family member or close friends, but we know that if we grow willingness there, that'll also appear as willingness to do it on their own behalf. We wanted to look at their basic attitudes about contacting OPGR. So attitudes are one group of beliefs. It's a feeling about doing something. And if people have a positive feeling about doing something, they're more likely to do it. And if they have a negative feeling, they're less likely to do it. In general, people had pretty positive attitudes about contacting OPGR if they were concerned. For the most part, they felt it was a caring thing to do. It was responsible. It would be useful. It had some utility. It was pretty safe. It would be helpful. It's sort of the right thing to do. It would be respectful, and a sense that it was needed or necessary. However, about a quarter of the folks said that they would feel embarrassed. So this goes back to sort of stigma issues and other things like that, right? I mean, it would be interesting to ask people sort of, would you be embarrassed to, let's say, contact the emergency room if somebody had broken their arm? Well, for the most part, we wouldn't be embarrassed to contact the emergency room if somebody broke their arm. They're like, geez, they broke their arm, they need help. Of course, that's fine. But you can see folks feeling embarrassed about that. That's starting to indicate that stigma around issues might be playing a role. And so that's part of our work, is we're going to have to overcome some of that. We know that around addictive behaviors, there's often stigma associated with them. But it was also about 4 out of 10 felt that contacting OPGR would be scary. And this could be complex. We're not exactly sure whether it's scary because, like, if I actually contact somebody else, that means, for example, my spouse maybe really does have a serious problem. And now I'm sort of admitting it to myself, and I'm maybe admitting it to somebody else. And that's kind of scary. Or whether they felt it was just sort of scary to contact like a public entity. Like would my spouse lose their job, or could they get in trouble, or things like that. And we wanted to explore more of that, but this notion of it being scary is definitely something that we're going to want to address. We don't want folks to think that contacting OPGR is scary. Now, we did ask a number of questions about deeper beliefs about contacting OPGR. So you can see about 3/4 agree that trying to get help for somebody who has a gambling problem is the right thing to do. So this is very good, and this is a belief that we want to normalize. We want to normalize that sense that sort of getting help for somebody is the right thing to do, and people in general do what they think is right. About 2/3 agree that they have a responsibility to intervene if they know somebody has a problem with gambling. So that's good too. It's that sense of sort of citizenship, of stepping up, of becoming involved. I mean, not everybody feels like I should be involved, but that's a good thing in terms of growing a sense of safety citizenship, as my colleague Carrie Finley discussed in a previous webinar. This notion of having a degree of responsibility for other people's well-being helps us all sort of grow collective well-being. And almost 3/4 agree that they would want somebody to intervene if they themselves had a problem. And we really like that idea, because I think we can get stuck in that sense of like, well, maybe I feel like it's the right thing to do, and I have a responsibility to intervene, but the other person just doesn't want me to intervene. So we can sort of flip that around and say, well, if you were the other person, would you want somebody to intervene for you? And for the most part, people said, yeah, I would. And that can help that individual overcome that hesitancy of intervening. So that's something else we'll want to bring out in sort of the communications and some of the things we'll talk about, that notion that, no, you know, if it was me, I'd want somebody to intervene. Now, these are sort of inhibiting beliefs. About half believe that if they contacted OPGR, they would be more involved and required to do something. So that could be that sense of, you know, I don't want to get too involved. I don't want to get like I've got to do something now. So we got to help people navigate that, and sort of what does contacting OPGR look like, and how much am I sort of engaged in now somebody else's issue. So we'll want to do some education and communication about that. Over a third of people believe you have to wait for a person with a gambling problem to hit rock bottom before they're willing to change. And this is a belief that just comes up in all addictive behaviors. Sort of, there's nothing you can do until the person hits rock bottom. You sort of have to wait until they really crash. And of course, you know, people who do hit rock bottom hopefully get services there. They don't always, right? Because we can also know that when folks hit rock bottom, that can be a trigger for suicide. But in general, this notion that with an addictive behavior, I have to wait for somebody to hit rock bottom is a myth. That's false. There's a lot of ways that we can use motivational interviewing and other techniques to help people start to change their behavior before they hit rock bottom. So this is something we want to challenge. We don't want a third of the people thinking, well, you just have to wait. No, you really don't have to wait. It's true that the first time we interact, maybe it's not going to be successful, but that doesn't mean we need to wait, because sometimes it is successful. About 13% believe that problem gambling is not an addiction. So that's going to be a piece of education. That comes up also with a lot of addictive behaviors. People just say, well, that's not really addiction. It's just the person making bad choices. So that's where we have to do education about how addiction works, how addiction changes the brain. And about a quarter of the people believe that people can stop gambling on their own. And that's complicated, right? I mean, even if somebody goes to treatment, they're still sort of doing it on their own. They're getting help, but ultimately they're changing they're engaging in the treatment and they're still doing it. But we want people to help realize that treatment and other resources can help. Fortunately, these inhibiting beliefs are not as prevalent as sort of the enabling beliefs, but these are beliefs that we're going to want to tackle in the communication and educate folks on, because they can definitely lead some folks to not take action or think you have to wait. And we don't want people thinking that. We want people to engage. Okay, another group of beliefs that we want to look at in terms of whether people take action is, do they think it's acceptable? That they might think it's something that they should do. They might think that it could be helpful. But if they don't feel like other people would accept them doing this, for some folks, that'll be an inhibiting belief. So we wanted to see, did they think it was acceptable? Now, about 7 out of 10 believe it is acceptable. So that's good. We want that to be higher. We want that to be, 10 out of 10. But so we've got some room to grow there. About a third did not perceive that their friends would find it acceptable. It didn't mean that their friends would find it unacceptable. It was just that they wouldn't find it acceptable. That meant that some of them thought it would be unacceptable, but some of them were neutral. But we want to push that down. We want to make everybody recognize, hey, contacting OPGR on something like this is acceptable. Sort of intervening and getting help is acceptable. We're all on the same page there. 31% did not perceive that their family would find it acceptable. 6 out of 10 did not think that the people who gamble would find it acceptable. And see, this is that interesting one. So this is where most of the respondents didn't think most people who would gamble would find it acceptable. And yet, when we ask people, like, would you want somebody to intervene for you if you were exhibiting problem gambling behaviors, they said yes. So this is a false belief. So this is one we definitely want to challenge and sort of say, no, most people, even people who gamble, would find it acceptable. And then it was a similar number who perceived that most people who have a problem with gambling would find it acceptable. So we want to challenge these and normalize the acceptance of doing something. That will not only foster bystander engagement, but it'll also create a sense that if I'm worried about my own behaviors, it now gives me permission to take steps on my own behalf, that sort of taking steps is an acceptable thing to do. So creating this broad sense of acceptance is going to be important. Now, whenever you look at sort of a more complex or sort of sophisticated behavior like intervening, you want to look at knowledge. When we look at a behavior like wearing a seatbelt, we're not as worried about, like, do people know how to wear a seatbelt? Wearing a seatbelt is a pretty basic behavior. It doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge. But in terms of actually taking steps to intervene and what resources OPGR can provide, this knowledge becomes very important. And knowledge was one of our leading predictors as to whether people had, in the past, actually done something. So knowledge becomes extremely important. So about 4 out of 10 report that they are not at all familiar with OPGR. Now, the good side is that 4 out of 10 reported that they are moderately or more familiar. So we had about 40% report that they're moderately or more familiar, about 40% report that they are not at all familiar, and then about 20% or somewhere in between those two. Now, we want that 40% reporting that they're moderately or more to be much higher, and we want them actually not just to be moderately familiar, we want them to be extremely familiar. So we've got some real opportunity to grow here. And obviously, if you're not at all familiar with OPGR, you're not going to know to contact them. I mean, you might go to the internet and find them, but even that notion that there's a group out there that can help. So this is where just sort of generally getting the word out will be important. About 4 out of 10 report that they're not at all familiar that OPGR provides free and confidential problem gambling treatment. So that's important too, because it's a great resource. And if folks don't know that that's something that they can access, that it is free, because obviously cost is a major barrier, but confidential is huge too, especially with behaviors around stigmatized things, behaviors like problem gambling. So this is important. We got to really put out there that these, and I know you all are doing this, but it just goes to show how much you have to sort of communicate about resources before folks are broadly hearing it. And about 44% report that they're not at all familiar that OPGR provides confidential guidance for people who are concerned about somebody else's gambling behaviors. So this is something else that we'll clearly do through the media, is help people learn about these resources, that just OPGR exists, that there are ways to get access to free and confidential treatment. And if you're worried about somebody else's behavior, you could contact them and get help about what you should do. And so this will be critically important for us as we look at the media. So when we take all of this and we look at it from the lens of some key takeaways, many people are in a situation to take action. So this is very good. It's very hard to address a behavior, especially a behavior that may be kind of rare on a population level, if the only folks that we can interact with are the 2.6%, right? If all of our work was just to reach the 2.6%, that's a needle in a haystack. But if we can engage, if 50, 60% of the population's in a position where they can start to engage with other folks, now we've got a lot of folks we can reach. So this makes it a lot better. We also know that there's room to grow concern about problem gambling. So this is going to be some basic education. Do people even sort of know about how problem gambling can appear? What are strategies we can do to reduce sort of higher risk gambling or situations that might lead to high risk gambling? So this is important basic prevention 101 information that we want to get out there and bolster that. We definitely need to do some work about sort of making contacting OPGR less embarrassing, right? About a quarter of the folks felt that could be embarrassing and scary, right? About 4 out of 10 were saying that it could be scary. So we don't want it to be embarrassing, and we definitely don't want it to be scary. And the good news is it's not, right? I mean, the resources, the counselors are great. So we need to get that good, positive story out there and help folks see that it's not embarrassing and it's not scary. And we need to normalize intervening, both in terms of expectation, and that goes back to acceptance. It's acceptable to do this. And we want to normalize it in the sense of, hey, this is what people do. If somebody's worried about somebody else's gambling behaviors, they take action. They don't wait. And so we'll want to normalize that. The more we normalize it, both in terms of expectation and what actually people do, that gives permission for people to speak up. And then, of course, we can't just give permission, but we have to show people what to do. We have to give them knowledge in terms of intervening. So here's a great website you can contact. You can call them. You can text them. You can chat online. All different ways that you can interact with them. And you can do it even if you're not the one with the problem, but you're contacting for somebody else. So we want to give them the knowledge to do that. And then we want to make that very comfortable so that again, is not embarrassing or scary, but it's like, oh, I could do that. So these are critical takeaways that we'll start to use, are already doing as we're working with in the process of media development. We'll pull specific pieces from the survey, start to infuse those in terms of message development and the tools that we'll start to create. So our next steps is diving into developing that supportive media. And that's going to look like some video tools. The video tools could be things that could be shared online. They could be shared in presentations. They could be shared through social media. Those will also include some audio pieces. Those audio pieces could be shared in similar ways or could be used as PSAs on radio stations or other forms like that. And then there'll also be print resources, resources that you could use in a presentation, in a leave behind, in different settings to help just as various channels to give information to address the very beliefs we've identified. We're going to put this all together in a toolkit so that it provides you with guidance on how to use these tools and guidance on what you might do with the tools to get out and start to influence beliefs. And then Katie will be coming back in the spring of 2019 to do some training on those tools to help make them more accessible and usable. And we'll be doing this through this lens and this idea of reflect, resource, and renew, in that the process can begin with just sort of that reflection, that sort of, is this something I should be concerned about, either in myself or in others? Because if I can just start to be aware of that, that's really good. And then that notion of resource, like, okay, if I am a little bit concerned about myself or somebody else, what do I do? Well, we can help resource. We can provide those resources. You've got OPGR and these great things, so we want to get folks to recognize that as a resource they can use. And then that big picture, sort of where are we going with this? Well, it's that place to be able to renew hope for ourselves if we're worried about ourselves, renew hope for someone we care about, a family member, but we want to give that path towards hope because it's that sense of being able to see a light at the end of the tunnel, that renewal that's going to give folks the energy to engage at all. So we want that. We definitely want that optimism, that hope because it's work to go through the reflect and the resource. So we want that sense of hope coming out at the end. Okay, so that's the content that I wanted to bring with you today. I know we looked at a lot of numbers. We have a key findings report that summarizes all this. You'll also have a copy, as Roxanne, an opportunity to listen to this again. but the key findings report has it in writing. And for me, at least, I have to sit there and look at the numbers for a while. But I think we can open, Roxanne, I'll turn it back to you as to how we best want to handle questions or any other follow-up.
Sure, great, Jay. We did have a question come in, and it was about a couple slides back in regards to the how much does it matter that that the awareness is out there that it's free, and are we able to break out and understand if people do know it's free? Was that included in our survey?
We did not split the sense of between free and confidentiality. We again, I mean, it's a great question. You always wish you could answer that specificity, but it's just that balance that the biggest factor for getting completions on surveys is the length of the survey. So we ended up coupling that. That's what we would call a double-barreled question, where we were looking at free and confidential, but we can't split that out. So we don't know how much the factor of free versus confidential was the issue. Good question.
Okay. And we did have a question more in regards to from our providers about the spring training. Is that the one that we've already talked about in April? And yes, that is the one where we will have the first day be for those folks who've participated in the community readiness assessment. The second day of that, I want to say, boy, I need my calendar in front of me. I want to say that's April 10th. Will be the rollout of the toolkit, followed up by the next half day will be our presentation and time to work together on our biennial implementation plans. So just wanted to let everybody know that we've already advertised that, and we'll have registration information out about that soon. Let's see.
Great.
I'm not seeing any other questions come in. I just wanted to make sure folks can use the chat box. I can also unmute one person at a time if you want to ask your question directly. If you let me know in the question box that you would like to do that. And we will be sending out the slide deck for you to look at, and we will share the report with you as well that Jay referenced. And then this recording will be, of course, on our Oregon PGS website, probably by early next week. And if questions come up after reviewing the report or looking at the slide deck again, we can always make sure that we work with Jay and his team there to make sure we get those answers for you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I am not seeing any other questions come in. But again, sometimes things need to resonate with you, so do please feel free to contact us. And with that, I want to thank Jay for being with us today and presenting this information for us as we move forward with this project and having additional information to be able to share out in the community when we are talking about the resource component to help people move forward as they are dealing with either their own gambling behaviors or those of the people that are part of their lives. So not seeing any other questions, we will go ahead and let you guys get back to your very busy days, and we will be seeing and hearing from most of you in the near future. Take care and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.